this was going to be the big story of the week until like 10 o'clock this morning. So there's rumors going around that E3's final grasp, the digital event, is a mess and will probably get canceled. So this is coming from Kyle Knight at Dual Shockers. So E3 digital event reportedly a mess and probably canceled. So the ESA recently revealed that the E3 2022 would not be taking place in a physical setting for the third year in a row, but now it's looking like the digital event is probably canceled too. E3's physical event cancellation comes due to COVID-19 pandemic still having a strong impact on society, with the world gradually embracing the digital era more and more because of the deadly virus. However, with so many publishers and developers opting to host their own digital showcases, the need for E3 has become questionable in recent years. Now it seems that there may not even be an E3 event at all for 2022, as an insider claims that it is a mess and probably canceled. The news comes from a reliable insider, Jeff Grubb, who recently uploaded a short video to his YouTube account discussing the E3 cancellation. As reiterated by Grubb in his video, the physical E3 event has already been canceled by the ESA. However, he goes on to say that digitally probably also canceled. So, Adam, one, are you surprised that the E3 digital showcase is canceled? Why do you think it got canceled? And what do you think like this means for... what are you thinking?
Am I surprised it got canceled? Yes and no. I mean, it already got partially canceled, so all of a sudden you knew they were scrambling. We've known for a while that E3 has been struggling to begin with, but at the same time, it generally doesn't take much to get a couple of developers together and be like, hey, you just want to put your streams on our channel all in a certain scheduled time. But the fact that it's canceled, I'm not surprised by at all, because I think it's started to become apparent that not only are a lot of companies realizing, oh, we can just make the video and click play on our channel and it works, or we go to Jeff Keighley, who seems to have a decent job of doing that himself, because he's now got the Summer Game Fest. He's also got the Game Awards, which people seem to watch a lot just for those trailers. And then you also have apparently IGN, who just gets tons of views on all their stuff that they're putting together these days. So I think a lot of developers, especially the smaller ones, are looking at it being like, we have so many other options that we can use and not have to go to the ESA, who quite frankly are really in over their heads now, because they think they're so high and mighty that they think that they're going to be able to get everybody just because they're the ESA. It's like, no. I think when we found out, like, I can't remember what that price tag was to get on that digital show last year, but we all looked at that and laughed. So I imagine after that, a lot of companies were like, all right, that's it, we're done. And I think that transferred into this year, where now a lot of them were already planning ahead of time of what they were going to actually do. And then when the ESA came and called, they were like, we'll think about it. And then when they said they canceled the full show, they're like, oh, we don't care. Then we can press play on a video ourselves. We don't need you.
Yeah. The writing is on the wall in terms of E3. Like, from a digital perspective, there is no benefit. They're not bringing anything to the table. The thing that I have, like, once again, going back to the benefit of the gamers, is that, like, no offense, I don't like the Summer Game Fest kind of strategy that we've done for the last year or two, where, you know, we get a bunch of press conferences. Like, Ubisoft did 2 last year. Like, they did 2 different ones and they were both mediocre. And I feel like with all these companies being able to, like, doing it on their own time, at their own pace, stretched out over 3-4 months, like, it's not that captivating. Like, with E3, I like the fact that everyone's there at the same time. Everyone is shooting their shot, and so they're all coming out swinging. Whereas I feel like with the Summer Game Fest kind of experience, it's like, okay, yeah, like, this week is so-and-so, this other week is, you know, another developer. And, like, they all become very muddled, and it becomes very anticlimactic. And it's hard to kind of get everyone's attention. And I think having that benefit of just, hey, we're all, like, everyone's attention is on us this week, as well as other developers. And I get that, you know, that's also a bad thing for them. Like, it makes sense for, you know, the big guys like Xbox and Sony. Like, they can say, yeah, we're going to do our press conference and it's going to blow it out of the water. But I remember Sony bungled it because they did a state of play right before E3 and then were radio silent until September.
Yeah, it was a while. It was
so
a while.
Like,
we were on the show complaining about it for weeks.
Oh, it was brutal. And so I think that there is something to be said of, like, having everyone gathered together. I think the idea of E3 just being a area of just, hey, we're just going to stream the press conferences. Like, they bungled it last year in terms of, you know, having so many press conferences that were mediocre at best, like not vetting it, not making sure that it kind of flows. But I think the other thing for E3 is getting games exposed, in the sense of, I've heard from other, podcasters and, like, I hate the term, but like game influencers were like, yeah, it's a great time because everyone is out, pitching their demos and showing their games. Even smaller indie studios are doing that. And it's a great way to kind of get your game out there and get that attention. Like, we all know we're all expecting it, right?
I've kind of also heard like the opposite of that too. Like, I've seen people talk about how, like, man, I'm glad that E3 is kind of like going away, because realistically, it's better just to watch things on YouTube anyway. And more often than not, the only things you're really enjoying at E3 is when you get to go drink with a bunch of people at the end of the night. Like, I've seen stories like that too. So I think it's just like different spokes for different folks kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm at the point now where, and even yesterday was a kind of a good example of what I kind of think I almost prefer at this point. I almost don't want like there to be even like, I don't even want state of plays anymore. I rather just, when you have something ready, just throw it. Like, randomly last night, the Moon Knight trailer from Marvel came out. And I was like, oh, I've been waiting to see when this was coming. And all of a sudden I get to watch that trailer, enjoyed it, and now I can move on. Whereas, we always zero in on this day and we're talking for like months about all these things we expect. And then when they don't happen, we get pissed. Whereas, like, if Horizon Forbidden West is ready to get announced, boom, it just shows up and it sets you off. Like, it's that kind of stuff that maybe I'd rather have, instead of, looking forward to X date that is like, for example, like I said earlier, February apparently is going to be a big day for a Sony package. But every time we hear stuff like that, Sony comes out with it and we're underwhelmed. So, like, we're getting hyped up for nothing. I almost would rather it just be, hey, when something's ready, we'll just, we'll figure out the date that we want to press play on the release date on it. I almost feel like that might work better, because then we're not hyping ourselves up for nothing. We'll just know ahead of time what we're walking into. Now, if we're talking indie developers, I think that's different. I think you can, whether it's through IGN or, like I said, with Jeff Keighley and his crew, or even anything else, like in general, like if you want to have like some sort of show for like the lesser known stuff, I think you can make sense. But like for Sony or Square, like for any major like title that we know about, I don't know if it needs to be this big extravaganza anymore. Because the way that we kind of take media in, it feels almost like it'd be better off if, like, the next big trailer for Final Fantasy 16 or Uncharted 5, if it ever is in existence, it almost feels like it'd be better if it just appears, because then it just blindsides people. It gets people talking in that moment.
The one problem I have, and you kind of highlighted it right there, is that by doing it that way, is that it disincentivizes kind of coming up with new IP, right? You're just talking like when the new Uncharted 5 or when, the new Final Fantasy comes out. But with doing
if another studio from Sony is working on like a new IP, same deal. Like, if we know it's from on Sony's channel, like, we're like, oh, what's this new thing PlayStation's popping out with?
I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Like, it's not going to get as much traction. But if it's like, hey, we are doing a good state of play, or whatever the heck what was that one called that was the actual good one?
What, the showcase thing or whatever they did?
Yeah, PlayStation Showcase. Like, the showcase, that was,
if you want to do one of those at like one point every year, fine. But like the whole rest of the year, if you got something else that you don't want to save for 7 months, like, just throw it up when you got time.
Well, I think the state of plays and stuff were a result of a lack of E3, right? Like, because I think, like,
but we've noticed the state of plays don't work because they're just a bunch of trailers for things we don't care about. So you could just do them separately, right? And they would have the same appeal. But we wouldn't be going into an hour presentation expecting stuff. It would just be a 2-minute trailer.
But you're saying that right there, is that like those state of play trailers are like, just throw them on the channel. But you just said a second ago that the if a trailer comes out on PlayStation Store, like, people are going to take notice. And I think that's the double-edged sword, in that some of these games might appeal to some people, but by having that large PlayStation showcase, it's like, hey, here are the games you're looking for, but here are some other ones that you may not have, looked at or checked out. But we have your attention right now to show to you.
Sony owned games? Because more often than not, they're third-party games or they're indie games. So they're not things that are like necessarily Sony's thing. What I'm talking about is like their brand. Like, if the Sony, like whatever Housemarque's working on next, whatever Insomniac's doing, like whatever Santa Monica studio, I know it's MLB, but San Diego Studios, but Santa Monica, I think, is also part of it. Like, whenever somebody of their caliber is doing something, I don't see why it has to wait until like this big festival or whatever they're doing. But like, if they want to put something together that mixes third party with that, I think that's still fine. But I think we're getting to a point now where like these big like couple of days showcases aren't nearly as like interesting as they are, because we all seem to end up leaving them either kind of annoyed or underwhelmed, or in this case, we end up laughing because they can't seem to string anything together, whether it's E3 or Summer Game Fest, according to you. I still don't mind SGF, but I understand why some people are a little bit iffy with it too.
But I feel like, and we're talking a lot about Sony right now, but like generally, I felt like a lot of people last year with the Summer Game Fest and the year before, like, were kind of like, and E3 was part of this, was like, it was all very underwhelming. And I think that that's a result. Like, I think people are forgetting how those E3s were before the pandemic hit. I don't think E3 translates well into a digital format. And so, yeah, it kind of makes sense for me that, like, yeah, cancel it. I think it's better for them to cancel it, save the money, like, kind of let stuff go and organically and see how it happens, and then come back next year with an E3 in physical and see how that goes. And I think that'll be the deciding factor. Otherwise, I see just other, like, I don't know. I think that there needs to be a conversation had of like, what does this look like? Because I think this spread out kind of trickle of mediocrity from everybody, not just at PlayStation, not just, it's everybody. Ubisoft does it, Xbox does it, Nintendo does it. Like, this trickle of just mediocrity to just constantly be heard and constantly be in the conversation doesn't really do anyone any favors.
Like, if Sony has a date in mind, like let's say out of pandemic or whatever normal is from now on, they have a set date that they're like, okay, we think that a bunch of these projects are all going to be in line with it. We've also been talking with X company. They got something ready that they're ready to reveal with us. And they can go, okay, so we know around this area is when we're going to be ready to do something big. Instead of calling up the ESA and setting up a booth, couldn't they just theoretically then book some like major theater somewhere and just do something like that instead, and maybe advertise that a couple months in advance? Like,
well, that was exactly
maybe that's the compromise between the two. I'm just at the point, like, personally, I don't think E3 is necessary anymore, because I think you can do that with any other brand. Even Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, like, they can all do this on their own name, on their own dime, and not have to worry about booking locations, because I think you can do it anywhere else, because I think people would be willing to travel to, let's say, I don't know where Sony studios are, but let's say in California, because that's just where brain works. They all want to go. I mean, they all would do it for Comic-Con anyway. So if you say like, hey, on this date, don't miss it. 2-hour extravaganza, big presentation of all our stuff. And it's going to be at this theater. It's like, I don't know, let's say a 5,000 seater. Don't miss it. Tickets go on sale at X.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the E3 as it is kind of redundant. Like, because the E3 was initially meant to be as like an expo to like vendors and stuff on which games to buy for the Christmas season or whatever. And so clearly that's no longer necessary. And so, yeah, it does. I think what you're talking about is you're talking about a PSX and that sort of thing. Like, hey, let's get all of our fans together. And we talked about this before, I think, when we talked about the future of like State of Play or something like that, is that, yeah, I think you need to make it a community event. And I don't think it translates well. I think having it as like, hey, we're going to get people together. We're going to, like, this is our date. And I think this is what all the developers and all the publishers need to do, is just say like, hey, we're going to do 1, 2, maybe 3 a year. And it's going to be, here's what to look forward to in the next 6 months and then the next year. Or even like we've talked about before with State of Play, I would do one PlayStation showcase. Here's what's coming in the next 12 months. And then do State of Plays that sort of, hey, here's what we talked about this at the showcase. Here's what it looks like going forward. Here's an update. Here's a little deep dive into something else. And then some interstitial stuff in there as well. And I think what it is this, it's a result of the presenters needing to do a better job in terms of not wasting our time. And I felt like last year without E3, and even with E3, actually, there was a lot of time wasting in terms of just mediocrity and not presenting well.
We have to keep in mind that in those years, it was pandemic. There just was like an absolute lack of games compared to what we're used to. I still will say pandemic. I know. But we have gotten to a point that we're having more people be able to actually like go back into work and having a little bit more work. Like up until Omicron, we felt like we were finally in that point that things were going to start to go back, and then Omicron happened and changed that.
Who knew like, Delta were the good old days?
Yeah, I know, right? But we know that there is a state where things can kind of sort of get back to what we're used to again. We're just kind of waiting for that to clear up again, probably in the spring, and seeing where that leads us again. But I mean, if you want to think bigger, like let's go bigger. 3-day weekend, California. Rent, I don't know, whatever big ass like area you want. PSC, PlayStation Con. Or you want to go, because I'm a big XCOM fan, XCon. Let's go. That sounds a little too criminal, but whatever. We'll just work with me on this. 3-day extravaganza, showroom floor. You got all these demos and stuff you can do there. You got these special interviews with people. You got all these like cool, like you maybe have a concert in there. Maybe you call up Jack Black, make them do another Tenacious D show like they did at BlizzCon that one time. You get Dave Grohl on hand. I'm sure he'll do a Foo Fighter show. Why not?
Get Sting.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Why get everybody? You know, let's just do all the things. You can even like hell if everything was going perfectly normal without a pandemic, you could have been like, hey, cool. Uncharted the movie is out in theaters in this day. A couple weeks later, you say like, "Hey, special event, bunch of you. We're gonna have a live screening of Uncharted the movie at this time in this part of the in the convention center." Like you can do so much with it. And then obviously the big day, whatever day you choose, maybe it's like a Friday to Sunday, so you pick Saturday night, the big night, 2-hour extravaganza in the big theater in the convention area. PlayStation, big conference or big showcase, that's the big thing. Or if you're Xbox, you're doing whatever. Maybe that's the future. I don't know. It might be something smaller. It might be something in the middle. But like, I don't think the big festival of every developer is a thing that we can do anymore. Because I just don't think it's feasible in the same way. Because I don't know if it's worth it to most of these developers to do it.
See, now this kind of, because what you're talking about makes total sense and such. But then what about something like Gamescom then? Does Gamescom become...
Well, I think Gamescom is a little bit more interesting because it's Europe, right?
Yeah.
So it makes a little more sense too because, again, like the distance isn't nearly as big because, you know, obviously Canada and North America are a little bit bigger. Yeah. But like, I don't know. And I guess unfairly too, North America seems to also think that it's got its own little place in the world and doesn't need to go anywhere else and they can do its own thing. So I guess there is that part of it.
But I guess like what you're talking about is having this situation where you have everyone together. That sounds like Gamescom. And does Gamescom benefit and do they become the new E3? And is that where we get most of our...
I don't know if they would become the new E3, but I think it would be like probably they could carve out their own segment too by having like more of the middling like AAA guys or having like more indie development in there. Whereas, like, again, we're only just talking like Sony and Xbox because that's where our brains are kind of going. Because I guess EA can fall into that category as well. Maybe Ubisoft can maybe do something to that extent. Or maybe they just kind of play nice and just work with everybody, you know? But, like, in the conversation of E3 kind of dying, I think that's the more likely alternative is that, you know, our major companies, like even Nintendo doesn't even have to do anything on their own. They can just keep doing the Treehouse stuff they do. But... you know, I could see a scenario where, especially Xbox now with what they have under the umbrella, you know, they could literally just carve out their own, like, section of the US and just be like, here, for this weekend, this is our shit. And if you're not an Xbox fan, go the hell away. This is our time.
Yeah.
But, I mean, considering they're going to buy everything in the next 10 years, I guess it will be all on Xbox.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
I don't know, though. Like, E3 is just this... It's just this weird thing that like we were so used to 4 years ago, and all of a sudden we're talking about it like it's never going to happen again. You know, it's jarring, but at the same time, like the more you kind of logic it, it makes sense as to why it's been going away. Because it really doesn't feel the same. Like say even 5 years. Like actually, you know what? If I go back and watch the 2016 one for Sony, for example, the one where they were in the theater and they had the live orchestra through everything. Like, I could probably watch that and be like, that's what I remember E3 being. And then I could watch, like, 3 years later and be like, yeah, this is not what I remember. Like, the last in-person E3, I don't remember being that good.
Yeah, that was the one, that was the Ghost of Tsushima one, was it?
Yeah, the one where they were in that weird, like, small set building.
And it was, like, 40 minutes because they had to, like, shuffle everyone over to different rooms and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I think this is the last... I don't think it's dead yet, but I think this is like the last. If they don't come back next year, because they're going to be losing a bunch of revenue in the sense that, you know, they're not like they've already put work into E3. Like they've been planning this since the moment last E3 canceled. and so they're going to be losing revenue on this. Like, I don't know. If E3 can't come back and blow us away next year, and I don't know if they
the
can,
next
because
year is at this point.
I think a lot of companies are also starting to realize that they don't need them as well, and that's going to hurt as well. So like, it'll be hard for E3 to come back from this. But I mean, I grew up with E3 being there was 2 times of year that I look forward to: Christmas and E3. And it's like, I'm used to that. I grew up with that. And so to kind of see it go away kind of sucks.
I think that's why we're also taking this a little bit differently, because we grew up with it, whereas I'm sure people that are just like high school age, they probably could care less if E3 goes away, because they're probably looking at like what Marvel does when just things show up, or all these other things, and they probably are more interested in that, because that's kind of why I've also thrown that out there, because it's kind of becoming the norm everywhere else. You don't see the big event that all the Marvel trailers are all coming out at the same time. Like, I know DC did like their little special thing around the Summer Game Fest or whatever time they did.
I know
that
Star Wars does it too.
Yeah, Star like they do carve out their own things for some occasions, but
and Disney does like
time,
doesn't Disney do like their own little convention thing?
Maybe, I've seen those things. I don't keep up with it very well. But like, more often than not, when I see like reveals for stuff, it's usually just kind of out of the blue, and it just kind of just makes waves and goes and it builds. So I don't know. Maybe that's our future, and we're just going to have to kind of learn to get used to that in the way that, we grew up with E3, and that's what we were used to. It's hard to say. We're also still trying to make decisions in a world where we aren't even in a normal setting right now. So we'll probably keep saying this every time that we talk about E3 until it finally, gets to try to be back to normal, if it ever does. We're asking something of a convention, basically, that can't do what it usually does. So it's hard to really say whether it's dead or not, because it hasn't been allowed for 3 years to actually do what it does. So in the end, it's hard to say. But in the end, like you said, there's been enough time now that I think companies are realizing that they don't need to anymore. So why bother? And maybe the new normal when we come out, both in pandemic and in gaming trailers, is just maybe going to be different now because of that.